recent issue of Time magazine stated that between the years 2005 and 2014, the incidence of major depression amongst young people between the ages of 12 and 20 has increased by 37%. It's a frightening statistic, and one of the major causes of depression is anxiety and stress over sitting exams. The remarkable thing about this problem is it can be so easily solved with a bit of understanding of psychology and how the brain works. Research by Hermann Ebbinghaus showed how your memory decreases over time. So you've learned something and then your recollection of that decreases over the weeks and months following that. And recall actually goes up a short while after learning, and then it decays very rapidly. 80% of the detail is lost within 24 hours, and you're left with about 2 or 3% persisting long term. So it's a really, really tragic loss of information that happens so rapidly. And what happens in schools is round about Easter time, maybe just after Easter, the keen students start the revision for exams that are going to take place in June. So we've got about 7 weeks perhaps between starting revision and the exams. Those that are less keen maybe will start beginning of May for June exams, so they've only got about 4 or 5 weeks. Then something remarkable happens. Schools have what they call study leave, where the students are sent home and they study on their own. They make a revision timetable, so they schedule in the different amount of time they're going to spend studying each of the different subjects, and they revise, they review, so that they know the information come the exams. But if you look at the graph, you'll see that if you've got 2 years worth of knowledge that you've accumulated writing notes in your exercise books and so on, copying from the board, and you haven't looked at those for maybe over a year, then your recollection of that is tiny. You've forgotten almost all of the content. So you don't just have to review, you have to relearn. And it's impossible to relearn 2 years worth of content in under a month. So what happens is you cram, you maybe pass the exam, but persisting long term, you know nothing. You can come back and look at the information after you've set the exams, and you know virtually nothing about the content. You've got a piece of paper to say you know it, but you don't. Schools need to review their policy. Rather than having study leave at the end of a course, they should build in review sessions throughout the course. So looking back at our graph, you see that it goes up before it goes down. So it makes sense to review at the peak rather than leaving it until you've forgotten most of the information. So you do your first review 10 minutes at the end of a lesson. Then, because you've reviewed it once, you can now leave it 1 day before you do your second review. Your third review needs to be scheduled in 1 week later, then 1 month later, and then 3 to 6 months later. And after 5 reviews, you know the information. It's been transferred from your short-term to your long-term memory. This means that when it comes to exams, you know the information. You don't need to revise it so much because it's been locked into your mind. The other massive benefit of this is that the more you know, the easier it is to learn new things. So if you've got a good grounding in a subject, you know that, you've memorised that, then when you have extra information, it can be built and connected to the underlying information. So it makes learning easier, more effective. And of course, if you know that you know the information, you just need to do some past papers to see how you'll be examined, to understand the type of questions you'll be asked in the exam, and you know all the information, you have no stress. What's more, because it's gone into long-term memory, rather than in the case when you cram, you can pass the exam but know nothing afterwards. With true long-term memory, you'll know it for the exam, you'll know it later on. So if you want to go on and study other information related to what you've learnt initially, the information is still there, you can still use it. And in something, if you say you're learning a language, you don't just learn it for the test, it becomes a lifelong skill that you can develop and use in later life. So there's so many benefits of just a little bit of knowledge about how the brain works. And if education changed to follow this methodology, then exam stress, depression, and lives of millions and millions of children around the world would be made better. Thank you for listening. Another tip in a week's time.